Well, pleasant good morning, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of the PR Man and the Coach Talking Ball on the Ballfather Podcast presented by Sports Keita. I'm Reggie Roberts, longtime NFL communications executive, and today we've got a special treat for you. Today we're talking to the preeminent sports writer in the National Football League who covers the league for one of the top newspapers in the country, USA Today. Let me say it to you again to make sure you got it. We're talking today to the top NFL insider who covers the National Football League. Our guest today is he's a current NFL columnist for USA Today and has been with the paper since 1993. Our guest was the 2022 Bill Nunn Jr. Award winner, first Black reporter to receive that award. He is a former contributor of ESPN from 2013 to 2027. He's been on all sorts of shows. He's won multiple awards. He's my good friend, Jarrett Bell. What's up, man? Hey, man, listen, thank you for joining us today. We're here to talk about the draft starts in 2 weeks. Obviously, everybody wants to talk about the draft. Obviously, you're writing about the draft. I just want to sort of get your opinion. Obviously, the NFL, as you and I have discussed many times, is a quarterback-driven league, and obviously the main crux of the conversation for this week, the next 2 weeks, will be about the quarterbacks. Give me your take on, what you're hearing. I keep hearing Carolina's going to take C.J. Stroud, but you're the expert. Give us your opinion on what you're hearing about what the Panthers are going to do with the quarterback spot at the number one spot.
Yeah, there's a great debate at number one. Because I think the Panthers may end up taking Alabama's Bryce Young. So there are different opinions on that. Obviously, the question about Bryce Young is whether or not he measures up size-wise. I mean, he played in the SEC, and he was the Heisman Trophy winner. And so that's one part of the argument for Bryce Young. C.J. Stroud has the measurables, obviously talented in his own right, and would be worthy of that spot. So we'll see how Carolina, really determines this pick. Talking to Frank Reich a couple of weeks ago at the NFL owners meetings, he said that one of the things that he has learned over his years as a coach, coming out of the league as a longtime quarterback, is that quarterbacks come in all shapes and sizes. So that would seem to suggest that, hey, Bryce Young at 5'11" or shade under 5'11", 204 pounds, could succeed. I mean, we saw Drew Brees succeed at 6 feet in the NFL, and we've seen, Kyler Murray at 5'11". So it's a different age now in the NFL, and so I think when you consider that and how the game has evolved and how they spread out, that can make the case for Bryce Young. But we'll see. I think they're going to make the decision, Reggie, in the next week or so, if they haven't made it already. And they may not announce it in another week, but in terms of those internal meetings, I think the GM, Scott Fitterer, and Frank Reich, the head coach, are going to, make their decision, along with the owner, David Tepper. He's got a say in this too.
He'll be involved. It's interesting because you read all the stuff. I saw the stuff that you wrote from the combine and from the owners meeting. The one thing that everybody keeps talking about with Bryce Young is how small he is. And when you look at him, you look at the pictures. I watched the pro day. I watched the workout. I mean, if I don't believe for a second he's 5'11". I don't believe it for a second that he's 5'11". He looks slight in his when he's got the practice clothes on. But again, you make a really good point. He did play in the SEC, and I think that matters. Here's the thing. He was also protected by a really, really good offensive line. A lot of those guys that protected him are now playing in the NFL. Which begs the question, for him to be successful, he's got to play with a team that's got a pretty good offensive line. Don't you agree?
Oh, no doubt about that. And that's for any quarterback, even Aaron Rodgers, right? You've got to have some protection, right? But I know what you're saying, that in order for a young quarterback to really succeed in the NFL, the optimal situation is to have a strong supporting cast around him, which begins with the offensive line. And Carolina likes its offensive line. They've done a lot in free agency to, really support a quarterback and give some balance to the offense. But the other thing that they've done, Reggie, is they have assembled an all-star coaching staff.
Oh, they have.
Yeah, and so we know Frank Reich and his history as a quarterback. They've got Thomas Brown as the offensive coordinator, who is an up-and-coming coach in this league, came off of Sean McVay's staff with the Rams. Very excited to see what he does now that he's stepped up as coordinator. And then, oh, by the way, they've got Jim Caldwell, they've got Deuce Staley, they've got Josh McCown. So they've got a lot of brain power that is really going to support the development of a young quarterback, whoever that is. And let me just circle back again. Jim Caldwell, the guy who got the rawest deal of maybe of any coach in the past 5 to 10 years. And if it wasn't Caldwell, it was Steve Wilkes. But Caldwell getting kicked to the curb in Detroit. They bring in Matt Patricia because his buddy is the GM, and Caldwell has never been able to land again as a head coach. But if you talk to Peyton Manning about Jim Caldwell, he would rave on and on about how good of a coordinator he is. You go back to the Baltimore Ravens, 12 years ago, when they changed coordinators in the middle of the season, or towards the end of the season, actually. I think it was December, and brought in Jim Caldwell as gave him the keys as the coordinator. They go to the Super Bowl. So Jim Caldwell has a great track record, a great mind, a lot of respect from people who have worked with him. So I think that's another factor in this whole thing. When they get that quarterback and start to develop him, that really is going to pay dividends for them.
I'm really, really excited about that coaching stuff. I read somewhere where they got 191 years of experience, like 85 years of coach of player experience. They got 10 Super Bowl rings. I mean, it's one of those things that matters. Coaching matters in our league. It does. It matters in our league. And I think Coach Reich's done a really good job of assembling some of the names you talked about: Deuce Staley, Josh McCown, Thomas Brown. I mean, that's going to be a really, really, really good step. Let's sort of switch gears a little bit with regard. And Jim Caldwell. Jim Caldwell was with us when I was at Tony Dungy in Tampa. He's as good a coach as there is. Let's switch gears about the quarterback a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about some of the guys who are being projected in the first round. Will Levis from Kentucky, Anthony Richardson from Florida. Anthony Richardson, when you look at him, 6'3", 244, his body he looks like an outside linebacker. He's a freak, his body. The number that concerns me with him is that he hadn't played a lot, and the completion percentage of like 53.8. What are you hearing about him? And our team or has some teams fallen in love with the measurables of how he looks from a quarterback standpoint. In fact, he's 6'3", 244.
Yeah, great point. I mean, I think that's the dilemma with teams, is to really kind of contain yourself when you look at the physical specimen, because that can get you in trouble. Go back to Jamarcus Russell. He was a great physical specimen, right? And I don't want to diminish Anthony Richardson at all by bringing up Jamarcus Russell's name, except to say physical specimen. Stephen Holder for Yahoo had a story after the combine, and he said that people were coming up to Richardson at the combine asking him, what position do you play? And they thought he was a tight end or a defensive end or outside linebacker. No, he is a quarterback. The other thing too is that he's just 20 years old.
Right.
So you look at, Bryce Young, Will Levis, Stetson Bennett at 25 years old, Herndon Hooker at 25. This guy's 20 years old. So you've got to build that into your evaluation in terms of how much more he can grow. But he's got some things that you really just can't teach.
You know what? You're absolutely right. And this time of year, there's all the mock drafts. Everybody likes this guy. Everybody likes that guy. I tell you what, I'm told, and maybe you know this, maybe you agree with this, maybe you don't. I'm told that this isn't a great year for quarterbacks. Is that true, or is that just speculation, media speculation?
Yeah, it's not a great year, but there'll be 4, maybe even 5 in the first round. So, go figure that. But 2018, there were 5 quarterbacks in the first round, and Lamar Jackson, arguably the best and was the 5th one picked, and arguably the best. You can make the case for Josh Allen too, but if you had to pick Lamar and Josh Allen, it'd be one or the other, right, versus the other 3 that got drafted in that first round. So whether it's a strong year or not, a lot of times, Reggie, it depends on what we were just talking about with Carolina, where you land and the system that you get in and the support that you have that would determine your success. It's not all of that, but that is a major, major part of it, because obviously you've got to have the talent and the wherewithal as an individual prospect to succeed as well. But where you go and the support and the coaching you get, critical.
All that matters. Well, right now, I'm going to put you on the spot. Of the 4 or 5 guys that we've talked about, which of these guys is NFL ready right now? Day one. Play.
Maybe the guy who goes to Carolina. But that's a great question, and we hear it all the time. And I mentioned 2018, the quarterback, the guy who was most NFL ready that year was Josh Rosen. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't Baker Mayfield or Josh Allen or Lamar. It was Josh freaking Rosen. And what happened to him? So, maybe CJ Stroud's that guy. Maybe it's really Bryce Young coming out of that system. I think it's going to really be determined by the supporting cast that you get. I think we can look at Anthony Richardson, and we just talked about him and said, okay, maybe we don't expect him to be as polished as some of the others because he hadn't played a lot. So give him that. But for these other guys, it's probably just going to come down to being put in the right situation. And so often it could just be so unfair for any of these quarterbacks to come in the league because the expectations are much more advanced than they were a generation ago in terms of the timeline and how quickly they expect these guys to develop.
It's funny you mention that, because I can remember when you drafted guys. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember this, that when you drafted quarterbacks, I mean, it was unwritten rule. He was going to sit for a year, maybe 2 years in some cases.
Or 3, yeah.
It's not the case anymore.
Yeah. And, I think part of it too, Reg, is that, the college game and even the high school game has become so advanced when it comes to teaching, the passing game and, the strategies in college as far as, spreading the field, that has morphed into the NFL in a big way. And I think quarterbacks and coaches see quarterbacks to be able to utilize their skills a lot differently than before. And then the other thing is just the salary cap. So, the clock is on. You draft one of these guys in the first round, and you pretty much have 4 or 5 years to get what you're going to get. Now, you may make a decision like the Giants did with Daniel Jones, like the Ravens have tried to do with Lamar Jackson. But at some point in those first few years, you're going to have to make a decision on a guy. So you want to play him. And Lamar, speaking of Lamar, he was MVP in his second year.
Right.
He came in as a starter middle to second half of that season when he replaced Joe. They brought him along gradually, and then boom, he got the job from Joe Flacco and, was MVP the next year.
If I to answer the question, if I had to pick, I would, based on the fact that CJ Stroud's played in Coach Ryan Day's pro style offense, I would say that he probably, in my opinion, I would think he might be the most pro ready guy of the 4 or 5 guys we're talking about. Big, 6'3", leader, dissects information really, really well, thinks on his feet, can run. I mean, he ain't the reason they didn't win in the semifinal game. I mean, he played his butt off against Georgia. He really did.
And you know what's interesting, Reg? I was at Georgia's pro day, right? And all the players coming out of Georgia, and several of the defensive players had that question put to them as you just asked, which one would you put at the top of the list? And to a man, those Georgia players said CJ Stroud. Now, they played against all of those guys because being in the SEC, they played against the guy Levis from Kentucky, and they played against Richardson, and they played against Bryce Young, and they all picked CJ Stroud. Now, remember, CJ Stroud had Georgia shaking in their boots in that national semifinal game, and probably should have beat them the way that game flowed. So they definitely had all the respect in the world for him. And they said that, like I said, 4 or 5 of the guys who had that question put to him said, yep, CJ would be number 1. So
we're going to switch topics here. You're on with the PR man, the coach talking ball on the Ballfather Podcast presented by Sportskeeda. Jarrett, you've covered this league a long time. You and I go back a long ways. You've covered the and you've interviewed a bunch of people. In today's NFL, who's the best interview from a coaching perspective, a player perspective, and maybe an executive that you talk to? Who do you like?
Yeah. There are a lot of guys I like. I miss a lot of guys too. Hey, Richard Sherman, being one. I'm really a Joe Burrow fan now. And I haven't had a lot of time with Joe Burrow, but let me give you a little story, and you'd appreciate this. Number one, I always thought highly of him when he came out of college and he had the draft situation in his hometown. He just always seemed like a quality guy. But after the playoff game in Buffalo, it took me forever to get from the press box down to the locker room. And I get to the press conference room, and they're on the last, and I walk in the room, Reg, and they go, okay, last question for Joe Burrow.
Oh, no.
And so I get there right when the press conference is over. And then, I stuck around and got a couple other people in the press conference. Then I go to the locker room and I see Joe Burrow. And I say, hey, Joe, I walked in on the last question on your press conference. And he said, what do you need? I got you. And we sat there and we talked for a few minutes. And, Reggie, players don't always do that, especially quarterbacks, star players. And, it wasn't like I was asking him for a life story interview, but it was, after a game and kind of what went down, and you're going to the next round against Kansas City. And he was just gracious and cool and chilly. And I was like, yeah, I see why this guy, has something going on. But there's some other guys too, like Frank Clark from the Kansas City Chiefs. I always like him because he just seems to be so authentic, and he will tell you, hey, my life hasn't been, my career hasn't been perfect. There's been some missteps in here, but he will own it, and he will give you some depth. Brandon Graham with the Eagles is another guy I've always liked talking to, a good guy. I met his wife, and she's a good woman, and they're just good, friendly people, and he has always been pretty gracious. William Golston, Tampa Bay defensive lineman. What a guy, enjoy talking to him. And one of his teammates too, Devin White, with the Bucs. So I was thinking about this, Reg, when we were talking about this. And another guy who I've only had a few instances with, but I kind of like him, and I've read him on social media too, is with the Cowboys, Micah Parsons. I think he's an authentic guy, and he's going to be fun to follow as he goes through his career. And he's a dynamic player, as we know.
You named that's a good word. You've named a bunch of guys who are not only dynamic interviews, but are dynamic players. Michael Parsons is a generational talent coming off that edge. He can stay healthy. He'll be a great player.
Yeah.
Golston, a whole lot of things going on in his life that are away from football. Because as a matter of fact, as you know, Nelson Luis, who's the VP of PR for the Bucs, is one of my former assistants, and I spent a lot of time in Tampa talking to him. Mm-hmm. And he says Golston's got a lot of, is interested in politics, likes a lot of stuff. So that's cool. What about from that list? Would all 5 of those guys make the Jarrett Bell all interview team?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. And there's a couple more. I'm gonna throw a couple other shout outs here too. Deion Dawkins, Buffalo Bills offensive lineman. Doesn't get a lot of nationally, but really like him, and he's a good community guy. I talked to some of the people, some of the reporters up in Buffalo, and they love him. And then Cam Jordan with the Saints, the defensive end, have always enjoyed talking to him, and I think he's got a big future in a lot of different areas that he could probably go into, including media or politics. He's a real cool guy too. So then we've got guys like Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr, quarterbacks who get a lot of opportunities that I think they do a good job. And Aaron Rodgers, you may not agree with everything he says, but, he'll tell you what he thinks. And so that's one thing that you can always appreciate. Same thing with Lamar Jackson, transparent or authentic, maybe is probably the best word to describe him. And so, yeah, there's a bunch of guys that would make my all interview team.
What about guys that you talk to? I mean, you cover the whole league, you cover the competition committee, so obviously you spend a lot of time on the phone with guys like Rich McKay and other members of the competition committee.
Oh, yeah.
What NFL executives have you enjoyed talking to as far as giving you the real solid scoop on what's going on within the league?
Yeah. Well, I can only give you a little bit of that because sometimes people give you stuff and
I kind of want to remain anonymous. Don't want to know that. Okay, I get that.
Yeah. But I will say this. Jerry Jones with the Cowboys. We go a long way back, and I was working with the Cowboys in their team newspaper when he bought the team in 1989. So
right.
When you talk about it from a timeline standpoint, I've known him, as a reporter and really had more access to him than I would say any reporter in his entire 30-something years of owning the team. I've been on his team playing, or both his couple of his Jets. I've had more meals with Jerry Jones than anybody in the NFL, dinner, lunch, so on and so forth. But we've also had a lot of opportunities to talk about a lot of things and not always agreed on them. Go back to the Colin Kaepernick situation, but have always been able to have dialogues and have always been able to go to him when I've got questions about some of the league business. Now, you always have to keep it in mind that people are speaking from, their interests, okay? Especially when you talk about team owners and the business of the NFL. So yeah, there's that context, but yeah, Jerry and Bob Kraft the same way with the Patriots have always enjoyed talking to them about the business of the NFL. Sean Payton's another one who I've had a lot of good conversations with over the years. And then going back to a former coach and a Cowboys connection again, it's Jimmy Johnson. That's probably the one coach who I've gained the most insight from, during, my years at USA Today. And, during those early years at USA Today, he was with the Cowboys, and then, he wound up with the Dolphins, and then in broadcasting and so on and so forth. But Jimmy has always been a guy who has shared a lot of insight and depth with me, not only about the teams that he coached, but just about the league in general. So I've always appreciated him. And I had a chance a couple years ago when Jimmy was going into the Hall of Fame to go down to the Florida Keys and spend a day with him on a boat, fishing. And he had invited me to do that like 10, 12 years ago and didn't work out. And I called him and said, hey, remember you invited me? I want to come do that. And so he was like, yeah, come on down. And we did that and had a great time. And one of the things that I put in the story is that I'm not the only one that's done that. I mean, so many coaches and GMs and Bill Belichick goes like every year. Jimmy's, telling me all these stories about Belichick and how he's trying to get Belichick to relax and Belichick wants to talk football. But it is one of those places where, several people in the NFL circles have come and hung out with Jimmy on his boat. So I'm glad that I had that opportunity to do that story before he went into the Hall of Fame.
We got about 5 more minutes with the PR man, the coach talking ball on the Ballfather Podcast presented by Sportskeeda. Roger Goodell, you spent time with him. You talked to Roger. We all know him. What's your thoughts about the job he's done as commissioner? And just want to hear your thoughts about him.
Yeah, wide-ranging, impactful. Obviously, he's doing something right because he keeps getting these extensions, and he's about to get extended again by the NFL owners for another extension. So we keep wondering, when is the last contract for Goodell? Because there was one, I want to say it was 2 contracts ago, and the prevailing thought was that, okay, this is going to be his last one, and now he's on to another extension. Now, all that to say, he's done so much for growing the game. It's, they've got, labor peace, they've got their media deals, so they have the stability for growth, which we've seen with all the different platforms that they're doing now with their media deals and how they've kind of evolved. And so I think that's one of the things that Roger gets a lot of credit for, even though there are other people, I'm sure, in the business side of it that do that. So, but they hit on a lot of their markers for trying to grow the game and grow the revenues. Remember a few years ago now, where the story came out that the NFL's target was for like $25 billion in revenue by 2027. Well, that's 4 years from now, and I think they're close to hitting that mark and definitely on track. Now, the one thing that has escaped Roger has been his ability to deal with racial issues, and be it Colin Kaepernick, be it the Brian Flores lawsuit, the lack of diversity for head coaches in the NFL. I think Roger has tried to do, many things on the coaching front. And if you look at, black team presidents, 7 of them now, people of color, I should say, where the league went 100 years without ever having a black president. So you've seen progress there, progress in general managers, assistant coaches, but the head coaches has still just been that problem. And why is that such a big issue? Well, when you look at any NFL game, Reggie, the two people who are most visible for any team, it's the quarterback and the head coach. And so that optic is still something that has dogged Goodell. But like I said, it hasn't just been that. It was how they handled Colin Kaepernick, and this whole Brian Flores thing as well, which is still ongoing. So, Roger has had his stumbles. And I think, if concussions were kind of the stain on Paul Tagliabue's legacy, race is really threatening to be the stain on Roger Goodell's legacy. But he's got another contract, so he's got a little bit more time to try to fix that.
Right. Okay, last question, because I know you got to run. We're right out of town here. You were the commissioner for one day. What would you do? How would you fix the league?
You know what I would do, just kind of relative to what I've just said? I think I would remove myself as the arbitrator in the Brian Flores situation, which, I know the attorneys for Flores and Steve Wilkes and Ray Horton have tried to get the courts to pretty much ensure that. But, Goodell and the NFL, just given the way that the contracts are written in the NFL, and when you talk about kind of the process for challenging labor issues, well, Roger Goodell, and we've heard this from the NFL Players Union many times before on discipline issues, the judge, the jury, the executioner. Well, I think Goodell could do something when it comes to removing himself as the arbitrator in this case, merely because he is mentioned as one of the defendants. And so I think that would be the right thing to do. So if I was commissioner for a day, I'd recuse myself from that position in this particular lawsuit.
We will leave it there. Hey, listen, will you come back and join the show, man? You got to come back when you get some time.
For sure, Reg. For you, no problem.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate you having me, man.
Thank you, mate. Listen, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining the PR Man, the Coach Talking Ball on the Ballfather Podcast. And we will dial you up within the next couple of months. We'll dial you up. Maybe post-draft right before training camp.
It's all good.
Thanks, Jarrett. Take care, man.
Okay. Yeah, take care.